the day the Galactic King executed the human general, a 2,000-year peace treaty died. I was holding a cup of cold coffee when they put a blade through General Mara Vaz. Not a metaphor, not a ceremonial gesture, a real blade swung by a real executioner in front of 10,000 witnesses who had dressed in their finest clothes for the occasion. I watched it happen from the third gallery of the throne spire of Velshar, standing between two armed Dominion guards who had been told to keep me calm and contained. They managed the contained part. Nobody managed the calm. Her name was Mara Vaz. She was 61 years old. She had gray at her temples and laugh lines so deep they looked carved, and she had spent 34 years keeping humans and the Galactic Dominion from tearing each other apart. She was the reason 3 separate border crises had ended with handshakes instead of wreckage. She was the reason I had a job. She was the reason a lot of people were still alive. And now she was gone, because a king needed someone to blame. My name is Elan Ket. I'm a captain in the Human Diplomatic Corps, which mostly means I carry documents, arrange meetings, and remember things that other people would prefer forgotten. I had been General Vaz's aide for 6 years. I knew her coffee order, her preferred negotiation seating arrangements, and the fact that she kept a small photograph of her daughter tucked inside the cover of every briefing binder she ever opened. I also knew, with absolute certainty, that she had not authorized any attack on the Kelthrin grain convoy that the Dominion Council had spent 3 weeks blaming her for. I knew this because I had been sitting 2 feet away from her when the attack supposedly happened. We were in a closed session on neutral station Arvith, reviewing trade data with a Pelari economist named Gavrin, who had terrible breath and excellent records. Mara had been in that room for 11 hours straight. She had not attacked anyone. She had barely eaten. The charges were a fabrication. Everyone in that gallery with half a brain knew it. The Kelthrin bloc had been pressuring King Aldrich for months to show them that humanity could be punished without consequence. And Aldrich, who had ruled the Dominion for 40 years and never once been told no by anyone who lived to repeat it, had decided that the cleanest solution was to find a human of sufficient stature, attach a crime to her name, and make an example. He chose Mara because she was the best we had. I think he believed that removing our best would leave us leaderless. He had clearly never studied how humans respond to losing someone they love. The ceremony had lasted 4 hours before the actual execution. There were speeches, formal charges read in 3 languages, a lengthy statement from the Kelthrin trade minister about the sanctity of civilian supply routes. Mara had stood through all of it with her hands bound and her spine absolutely straight. She did not beg. She did not argue. She looked at one point directly up at my gallery, found my face in the crowd, and gave the smallest nod I have ever seen a human being produce. That nod was an instruction. 3 years earlier, on a rainy afternoon on Earth's eastern coast, she had sat across from me with a cup of tea going cold between her hands and said something I had not fully understood at the time. She said that she had spent her career hoping the accord of Velshar would hold forever, but she was not naive enough to believe in forever. She said that if the treaty ever broke beyond repair, if the Dominion ever crossed a line so fundamental that no diplomacy could unsew it, she needed someone she trusted to send a word. One word, to a specific address, with no other message attached. The word was Velanthos. I did not ask her what it would trigger. I did not need to. I trusted Mara Vaz the way you trust the ground under your feet. You do not demand to understand tectonic geology before you take a step. When the blade fell, I looked away. I am not ashamed of that. There are things a person should not watch, and that was one of them. I heard the sound of the crowd, a strange mixed noise that was part ceremony and part something else, something the Dominion dignitaries had perhaps not anticipated. The 10,000 witnesses were not roaring with approval. They were murmuring, a low, shifting sound like a tide going out. The 2 guards on either side of me were watching the dais. They were not watching me. I pressed 2 fingers to the inside of my wrist, where a subdermal communicator had been installed during my diplomatic certification, and which I had never, in 6 years of service, used for anything except scheduling confirmations. I pressed the activation sequence. I whispered one word into the pulse sensor pressed against my vein. Velanthos. The communicator would encrypt the signal in a rotating Pelari-human cipher, bounce it through 4 relay buoys, and deliver it to an address on Earth that I had memorized but never written down. The whole process would take 11 seconds. I counted to 11. Then I picked up my cold coffee from the gallery railing, took a slow sip, and turned to face the guard on my left. "I would like to return to the human embassy now," I said. "I have a report to file." He looked at me with the particular expression that senior Dominion officers wore when dealing with humans who were not behaving the way they expected. It was a look that blended mild contempt with mild confusion, like someone who had kicked a sleeping animal and found it not entirely asleep. "The ceremony is not concluded," he said. "The part I was required to witness is concluded," I said. "I witnessed it. It is concluded." He did not have a good response to that, which is something that happens to people who argue with diplomatic corps personnel. We are trained to be very precise about the edges of our obligations. They walked me out. The corridor outside the throne spire was all pale stone and high ceilings, and the faint smell of the Velshar's famous ornamental vines, which bloomed once every decade and were currently, apparently, in season. The flowers were a deep purple red. They were beautiful. I hated them. A junior aide from the human embassy met me at the outer gate. Her name was Petra Wills, 24 years old, 2 years into her first assignment, and she had eyes that had clearly just been crying and a face that was working very hard not to show it. She was holding a data case and a formal jacket for me that I had not requested. "They sent you the jacket," I told her. "Ambassador Owen said you would need it for the documentation session," she said. Her voice was steady. I was impressed. "Ambassador Owen is probably right," I said. I took the jacket and put it on. "Petra, did anything unusual come through the embassy's secure channel in the last 10 minutes?" She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything I needed. "There was a priority routing confirmation," she said carefully. "Automated. Ambassador Owen called it a system check." "That is what it is," I said. "Walk with me." We walked. The streets of Velshar Prime were wide and paved in the blue-gray stone that the planet was famous for, and they were full of citizens who had apparently decided that the day of a public execution was a good day to close their shops and stand outside looking at nothing in particular. They were not celebrating. I noted that carefully. The Dominion Council had expected celebration. What they got was a city holding its breath. At one point, a child, no more than 8 years old, some species I did not recognize, large amber eyes and small, careful hands, reached out from a doorway and touched the sleeve of my diplomatic jacket as I passed. Not aggressively, gently, like a question. I paused. I looked down at the child. "I know," I said quietly. It was not a thing I could explain. It was simply true. The child drew its hand back and watched me go. Petra was quiet until we turned onto the Embassy Boulevard. Then she said, very softly, "What happens now?" I thought about Mara Voss and her photograph tucked inside briefing binders. I thought about the word I had whispered into my wrist. I thought about the fact that humanity had been patient for 2,000 years, had held itself back and measured its steps, and honored every clause of a treaty that had always favored the other side, and that it had done all of this not out of weakness, but out of an understanding that the alternative was worse. But patience is not the same as submission, and there is a point past which even the most measured response changes shape. "Now," I said, "we wait, and we document, and we do not panic." Petra nodded. She was quiet for another half block. "Are we scared?" she asked. I considered the question honestly. "No," I said, "I think they should be." We reached the embassy doors. Above us, the Velshar ornamental vines draped across the gate arch, their purple-red flowers trembling slightly in a wind I could not feel. I pushed the doors open and went to file my report. Behind me, somewhere beyond the embassy walls and the wide stone streets and the silent citizens, somewhere out past the star lanes and the jump corridors and the carefully logged positions of 40 human warships whose transponders were now, for the first time in 2,000 years, broadcasting absolutely nothing, something was waking up. Mara Voss had planned for this. She had hoped it would not be needed. And somewhere between those two truths, history was turning over, slow and certain as a tide. I filed the report in 40 minutes, not because there was nothing to say, but because I had been trained by a woman who believed that the most dangerous documents were the ones that said too much. I wrote what I saw. I wrote what I heard. I wrote that General Mara Voss had been executed on charges that, in my direct personal witness, could not be accurate, and I signed my name and sent it through 3 separate channels simultaneously: the Human Diplomatic Archive, the Interspecies Tribunal's open submission portal, and a personal contact at the Pelari Observer, which was the closest thing the galaxy had to a news organization that nobody had managed to buy. Then I sat back in my chair and listened to the embassy. It was very quiet. Not the quiet of an empty building. The staff was all present, 41 people, diplomats, translators, communication officers, security personnel, 2 cooks, and a maintenance engineer named Colin Harper who had worked the same hallway for 18 years, and who I had once seen talk a panicking junior attaché through a broken door seal with the calm of someone who had genuinely seen everything. They were all present. They were just not making any sound. Humans do that. It is one of the things about us that other species consistently misread. When a Kelthran is frightened, they make noise. High-pitched, rapid, overlapping sounds that serve as both distress signal and social bonding mechanism. When a Velsharan is frightened, they move restlessly and constantly, burning the feeling through their legs. When a Dominion grandee is frightened, they call meetings and produce paperwork. When humans are frightened or angry or both at once, and processing something too large to immediately categorize, they go quiet. The Dominion Council had watched 41 embassy staff go silent after a public execution and had read it as shock, as grief, as the particular stillness of a species that had just been reminded of its place. Ambassador Paul Owen was in his office with the door open when I arrived. He was 63, broad-shouldered, with close-cut white hair, and the kind of face that had spent decades arranging itself into expressions of polite patience regardless of what was happening underneath. He was looking at a screen and not reading it. "Sit down, Elan," he said without looking up. I sat. "They're already sending formal condolences," he said. 11 delegations in the past hour. Very sorry for the loss of such a distinguished officer. Deep respect for the accord process. Confidence in the continued strength of the treaty relationship." He paused. "The Kelthran bloc sent flowers." "What kind?" I asked. "The expensive kind." He finally looked at me. "The routing confirmation that came through 20 minutes before you returned. That was you." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at his screen again, not reading it. "You know what that means," he said. "Mara knew what it meant," I said. "She gave me the word 3 years ago. She told me to use it if the treaty broke beyond repair. I think we can agree the treaty has broken beyond repair." Owen was quiet for longer this time. Outside his window, the city of Velshar Prime was doing its peculiar stillness, all those citizens in the streets with their closed shops and their watching eyes. "They executed a human general on fabricated charges," he said finally, "in front of 10,000 people, and they sent flowers." "Yes. They believe we will accept this. They believe we will grieve and adjust," I said. "They believe we are a managed species. They have believed that for 2,000 years, and we have been careful not to correct the impression." Owen turned to face me fully. His expression was the one he used when he had already made a decision and was checking whether anyone in the room was about to give him a reason to unmake it. Nobody was. "Document everything," he said. "Everything you can find. The convoy records, the session logs from Arvith, Gavrin's attendance records. If the charges are fabricated, I want the fabrication on paper before the week is out." "I've already started," I said. He nodded. He looked back at his screen. "Go find Colin Harper," he said. "Tell him we may need the secondary secure room cleared out. Some equipment may be arriving." I did not ask what equipment. I stood, straightened my jacket, and went to find Colin. The secondary secure room was at the end of the east corridor, behind a maintenance panel that most of the staff believed housed water recycling components. It did house water recycling components. It also housed a very different set of components behind those, installed during the original embassy construction by engineers who had been briefed on contingencies that were, at the time, considered extremely unlikely. Colin Harper was already in the corridor when I found him, carrying a thermal wrench and looking at the maintenance panel with the expression of a man who has been expecting a visitor. "Ambassador send you," he said. "He said equipment may be arriving." Colin nodded slowly. He looked at the panel. He looked back at me. "Been 18 years, he said. "Never thought they'd actually do it." "Do what?" He gave me a brief, flat look. "Whatever the plan is, Captain, I just keep the lights on." He pulled out his wrench. "Give me 4 hours." I left him to it. The next 48 hours were the strangest I have ever lived through, and I grew up in a household where my father once accidentally started a small diplomatic incident by mispronouncing a Pelari greeting at a community potluck. Strange is a relative concept when you work in diplomacy. The council sent 3 more delegations to the embassy. Each one expressed sorrow, confidence in the treaty's resilience, and mild concern about the embassy's communication activity. None of them said directly that they knew I had sent a signal. None of them asked directly what the signal had triggered. They were, in the way of very powerful people who have spent too long being feared, unable to ask questions that implied they were not already in control. I met each delegation politely. I served them the good coffee, the kind reserved for significant guests. I answered every question they asked and none of the ones they didn't. On the first night, I accessed a restricted feed through the embassy's deep range scanner, which Colin Harper had, apparently, spent 18 years keeping in excellent condition. The feed showed Earthside commercial traffic patterns. The shipping lanes were quiet, not busy quiet, empty quiet. I had grown up watching Earth's orbital lanes, and they were never empty. They were one of the busiest transit corridors in the human sphere, always full of haulers and passenger liners and cargo platforms moving the business of 9 billion people in 100 directions at once. To see them, empty was like looking at a river that had stopped flowing. It had not stopped, it had changed course. I found Petra Wills at the communication station at 2 in the morning, running analysis on signal traffic, with the focused expression of someone who had stopped pretending to sleep. "What are you seeing?" I asked. She pulled up a display. "Transponder signals from the human fleet have stopped broadcasting," she said. "All 40 registered vessels, not decommissioned. The drive signatures are still present on passive scan. They've just gone dark." "When?" "Progressively over the past 30 hours. The last one went dark 4 hours ago." She looked at me. "Where are they, Captain?" "Exactly where they're supposed to be," I said. She absorbed this. She was 24 and smart enough to understand that there are answers that are also instructions. "What do I log for the shift report?" she asked. "Standard monitoring activity. No significant signals. Routine." She nodded and wrote it down. I went back to my office and sat in the dark for a while, thinking about Mara Voss and the photographs she kept in her briefing binders. I thought about her daughter. who was 12 years old and living with her grandparents in a coastal town on Earth, and who had not yet been officially notified, because official notification required an ambassador's signature, and Owen was waiting until he understood what he was notifying her into. A world with a treaty, or a world without one. It was going to be a world without one. I knew that now, with the certainty of someone who had spent 6 years watching the woman who held everything together, and who now understood what holding everything together had actually cost. The Kelthran admiral found me on the second morning. Her name was Dara Velm. She was senior fleet commander for the Kelthran military presence on Velshar Prime, which meant she had been at the execution, which meant she had either supported it or been ordered there, and had been too professional to do anything except obey. I did not yet know which. She met me in the public corridor outside the embassy market, which was the kind of meeting that was not technically a meeting. She was in civilian clothes, which for a Kelthran admiral was an extraordinary statement. Kelthrans wore their rank the way most species wear skin. "Captain Ket," she said, "you look like someone who has not slept." "I look accurate," I said. She fell into step beside me. We walked. "The king is pleased," she said. "The Kelthran trade minister is pleased. The council has issued 3 statements this morning about the strength of the treaty and the justice of the process." She paused. "No human has responded to any of them." "We're composing our thoughts," I said. "You have gone quiet," she said. "All of you. Every human on this planet in this city, 41 embassy staff, 12 human-owned businesses in the merchant district. The human choir at the Intercultural Center canceled their rehearsal." She looked at me sideways. "We were told the silence would mean acceptance." "Who told you that?" She did not answer. She looked ahead, at the wide blue-gray street and the closed shops and the ornamental vines heavy with their purple-red flowers. "I oppose the charges," she said quietly. "Internally, in the closed session, I presented my objections through the correct formal channels and they were noted and overruled, and I was told that my concerns reflected excessive caution." "I believe you," I said. "I meant it." "What is the silence?" she said. "What does it mean? Not what the council is telling itself. What does it actually mean?" I stopped walking. She stopped beside me. I looked at her for a long moment. A Kelthran admiral in civilian clothes on a blue-gray street, asking a human captain what the silence meant. She deserved an honest answer. She was one of the few people in this city who had tried to stop what happened through the proper channels and who had been overruled. That mattered. "You have never seen us angry," I said. "The Accord kept that contained for 2,000 years. You have seen us frustrated and you have seen us grieve, and you have seen us push back in committee rooms and negotiation halls, but you have never seen what humans are like when we decide that a line has been crossed that cannot be uncrossed." I paused. "Neither have we, honestly, not in a very long time." She was quiet. "The silence is not acceptance," I said. "The silence is what happens while we decide." She looked at me for a long moment. "And have you decided?" she asked. I thought about the word I had whispered into my wrist. "Someone has," I said. She nodded very slowly, like a person filing away information they hoped they would not need. I left her on the street and went back to the embassy. That evening, Paul Owen called me into his office. The door was closed this time. On his screen was a single line of text, a confirmation code from an Earth address I recognized from Mara Voss's personal files. The response to Valanthos had arrived. Owen read the code aloud. It was 12 characters. I will not reproduce it here. "That's the activation sequence," he said. "Yes," I said. "Do you know what activates?" "Mara didn't tell me the specifics," I said. "She told me it was big enough to matter and careful enough not to become the thing we were fighting against." He sat back. He looked at the ceiling. "The human fleet has gone dark," he said. 40 registered vessels off transponder." "I know." 40 registered vessels, he said again, with a very particular weight on the word registered. He looked at me. Elan, are there other vessels? I thought about the question. I thought about Mara, who had spent 34 years in diplomacy and before that 10 years in fleet engineering, and who had once told me, over terrible cafeteria food on Arvath Station, that the most important word in any treaty was the word that was absent. The Accord of Velshar had capped the human fleet. It had defined fleet with great care. It had defined warship with great care. It had not defined deep hauler. It had not defined modular configuration. It had not, in 2,000 years of careful renegotiation, ever thought to ask what was sitting in 100 quiet shipyards across the human sphere, documented as civilian freight carriers, crewed by people who had second certifications in tactical systems and who had been running drills twice a year for a very long time. Ambassador, I said, I think we are about to find out. He looked at me. His face was doing something complicated. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. I left his office. I walked back down the east corridor, past the secondary secure room where Colin Harper's lights were on, past Petra Will's station where she was still awake and still working, past the window that looked out over the blue-gray streets of Velshar Prime. The city was still quiet. Somewhere out past the stars, something was moving. I went to my room. I did not sleep. But I felt, for the first time since the blade fell in the throne spire, something that was not grief. I felt ready. There is a kind of knowledge that lives in your body before your brain catches up to it. I felt it at 7 in the morning when I walked into the communications center, and every screen in the room was active, and Petra Wills was standing with both hands pressed flat on the console edge, staring at a readout with the expression of someone who has just opened a door and found that the room behind it was considerably larger than the house. Captain, she said, and her voice was completely steady in the way that voices go steady when steadiness is the only available option. You need to see this. I looked at the screens. The first showed a passive scan of the Velshar system approaches. In the 12 hours since I had last checked, the number of unregistered drive signatures in the outer system had increased from 0 to 412. 412. I stood very still. They're not broadcasting transponders, Petra said. They're not making any aggressive approach. They're just there, positioned at every viable jump exit within 6 light years. She paused. Configuration analysis says they're haulers, freight carriers, civilian-class drive signatures. Yes, I said. Captain, a freight carrier does not station itself at a military jump exit. No, I said, it does not. She looked at me. She was 24 years old, and she was one of the sharpest people I had met in 6 years of diplomatic service, and she was working through something in real time. How long, she said, how long have we been building them? I don't know exactly, I said, long enough. She turned back to the screens. The council doesn't know yet. Their long-range passive isn't calibrated for non-broadcasting signatures. They're still looking at a system with 40 missing warships and assuming those 40 ships are the problem. She paused. They're going to find out soon. Yes, I said, they are. I went to find Ambassador Owen. He was already on a secure channel with Earth when I reached his office, and he held up one finger without looking at me, which meant wait, which I did, standing by the door while he listened to something I could not hear, his expression cycling through a range of responses that never quite settled into any one thing. He closed the channel. Earth Command has made contact, he said. The senior officer is a woman named Admiral Kate Laurie. She is 34 years old. He paused, as if giving me time to process that. She is the commander of what Earth is formally designating the reconstituted independent fleet. 2,217 vessels. All of them have been civilian registered for between 15 and 60 years. All of them can complete combat configuration in 11 hours. I sat down. I had not been planning to sit down, but my legs made the decision independently. 2000, I said. 2217, he said. I thought about the Accord of Velshar. I thought about the 40-vessel cap that humanity had honored scrupulously for 2,000 years. I thought about what Mara Voss had told me about the most important word in any treaty being the absent one. The treaty capped the fleet, I said. It did not define the fleet's potential. No, Owen said, it did not. She knew, I said. Mara knew. She wasn't just maintaining the accord. She was maintaining the appearance of a compliance that served everyone's interests as long as the accord held. She was a fleet engineer before she was a diplomat, Owen said quietly. She spent 10 years in modular ship design. She knew exactly what was possible within the treaty's language and what was possible just beside it. He looked at his desk. She spent the last 34 years hopping no one would ever need to know. I thought about her straight spine and her bound hands, and the small nod she had given me from the gallery. She had known this was coming. She had gone to that execution knowing what her death would trigger. She had not run. She had not tried to negotiate her way out. She had stood straight and given me my instruction and accepted the consequence of a king who thought he understood the ledger he was marking. Admiral Laurie's message, Owen said. She made something clear. This is not an invasion. The fleet is not here to conquer Velshar. It is positioned to impose an economic blockade on Velshar Prime and the 5 Kelthrin core worlds until the king abdicates and submits to tribunal jurisdiction. All other Dominion systems will remain fully operational. He paused. She said, and I am quoting, "We are not interested in becoming what started this. We are interested in what comes after." I exhaled. That's Mara's language, I said. Almost word for word, he said. Of course it was. Mara had probably drafted the message herself, years ago, sitting in some quiet office somewhere, hoping it would never need to be sent, making sure it was ready anyway. I had work to do. I went back to my office, opened my documentation files, and kept going. The evidence of the fabrication was assembling itself with the neatness of a case that had never been hidden particularly well, only suppressed. Gavrin, the Pelari economist, had provided a full certified session record from Arvith without being asked, apparently having anticipated that it would be needed. The doc manifests for the Kelthrin convoy showed a rerouting order that originated from the Dominion Logistics Ministry, not from any human source. 3 separate freight schedulers, all Dominion citizens, had submitted testimony to the Interspecies Tribunal's open portal overnight. People who had been waiting. The Pelari Observer published its first report at midday. By evening, every major independent news service in the galaxy had picked it up. The headline was simple and exact. The convoy attack attributed to General Mara Voss had not occurred. The Council issued a denial. The Council's denial contained 3 factual errors that anyone with access to the manifest records could verify in under an hour. By the time the sun was setting over Velshar Prime's blue-gray rooftops, 12 Dominion member species had issued statements of neutrality. 3 smaller species had done something more significant. They had formally requested to associate with the human blockade position, citing their own unaddressed treaty grievances. The Dominion was not what it appeared to be from the inside of its throne room. It was a structure held together by a mixture of genuine shared interest and the long-accumulated fear of a king who had never been seriously challenged. Remove the fear, or shift it, and the structure revealed itself as considerably less unified than its public presentation suggested. I was in the middle of drafting a communication summary when Admiral Dara Veln appeared at the embassy entrance. Not in civilian clothes this time, in full uniform, alone, no escort. I met her in the small reception corridor just inside the main door. Colin Harper was nearby, doing something with a cable conduit, not looking at us with the practiced invisibility of someone who has learned that the most useful thing you can do in a crisis is be unobtrusive. Veln looked at me with the expression of a person who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just decided to put it down. "The convoy rerouting order," she said. "I have the internal Kelthran fleet communications from the same period. They confirm the route change originated from the Dominion Ministry, not from any human source. I have been holding these records for 3 weeks." I looked at her. "Why?" I said. "Because I submitted them through the correct formal channels," she said, "and was told they were not relevant to the case." Her jaw tightened. "I was told, by people who outrank me considerably, that the most appropriate course of action was to trust the process. And now," she said, "I am looking at 400 vessels in our outer system and a galactic news cycle and 12 neutral declarations, and I am concluding that the process has run its course and the records are relevant after all." She held out a sealed data drive. "The Kelthran bloc did not all agree with this," she said. "Some of us understood what a broken treaty would mean. We were outvoted." She paused. "We were afraid that opposing it more loudly would make things worse. We were wrong about that." I took the data drive. "Thank you, Admiral," I said. She straightened. "I want it on record that I oppose the charges, in the proper documentation." "It will be," I said. "I will personally ensure it." She nodded once with the precision of someone who has just made a decision they know is permanent. Then she turned and walked out of the embassy entrance, back into the blue-gray streets. Colin Harper, not looking up from his cable conduit, said, "That's the thing about cornered situations, Captain. Sooner or later, someone decides they don't want to be on the wrong side of history. Usually right before history stops being a future thing and starts being a present one." "Have you been listening to everything?" I said. "I've been right here," he said. "I can't help what I hear." I went upstairs with Veln's data drive and Owen's confirmation, and the Pelari records and the tribunal submissions and the observer's coverage, and I sat down, and I thought about Mara Voss, who had seen all of this coming and had prepared for all of it, and had never told me because she had hoped it would not be necessary, and because knowing would have been a weight I could not have carried for 3 years without it showing. She had carried it for 34. I sent the data drive's contents to the tribunal portal, the observer, and 6 independent diplomatic archives simultaneously. Then I sat back and let the day finish becoming what it was going to be. Outside, the ornamental vines swayed in a wind coming in from the west. Their purple-red flowers caught the last light of the Velshar sun and held it for a moment, bright and strange, before letting it go. I was eating a sandwich in the communications center, because nobody had remembered to schedule meals, and my body had started reminding me of this loudly, when Admiral Kate Laurie's voice came through on the open diplomatic channel. She had a calm voice, unhurried, the kind of voice you associate with people who have thought through every word before they say it. "This is Admiral Laurie of the reconstituted Independent Fleet. We are currently positioned at all viable jump exits within 6 light-years of Velshar Prime. We are not here to engage in any offensive action. We are here to hold a position. All civilian traffic from non-Kelthran, non-Velshar systems will continue to pass unimpeded. The blockade applies specifically to Velshar Prime and the 5 Kelthran core worlds. We invite any vessel wishing to confirm this to attempt transit on any other lane. They will find it open." She paused. "We have one request. We ask that King Aldrich submit to the jurisdiction of the Interspecies Tribunal to answer the charge of judicial fraud in the matter of General Mara Voss. We are prepared to wait. We are very good at waiting." The channel closed. The Council's response came 40 minutes later. It was loud, formal, and contained the word aggression 17 times. It announced immediate mobilization of the Dominion Core Fleet, which numbered at full strength around 800 warships. 800 warships against 2,217. I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired and sad and aware that the next stage of this was going to involve people who had nothing to do with Mara Voss's death-making decisions under the pressure of a confrontation they had not asked for. That is always the shape of these things. The ones who cause the crisis are rarely the ones who carry the weight of it. The mobilization order went to the Dominion Fleet's 12-member species commands simultaneously. And here is where something happened that I do not think the king had modeled. 7 of the 12 species commands did not respond. Not refusal, not protest, no response, complete communication silence. 2 species issued formal statements of neutrality within the hour. 2 more stated that they were reviewing the evidentiary record before committing to any operational posture. The Kelthrin Corps Command, which was Admiral Veln's direct superior chain, issued a single line of text. The Kelthrin Block is conducting an internal review of the circumstances leading to the current situation. Fleet operations are suspended pending conclusion of that review. That left the king with his personal Royal Guard fleet, which was around 60 warships, and the Velshar Home Defense units, which were another 30. 90 vessels against 2,217. The king did not accept these numbers quietly. He did something that I learned about secondhand through Colin Harper, who had learned about it through a maintenance technician at the Spire's own systems who apparently owed Colin a favor from a decade ago involving a heating unit in a very cold winter. The king ordered a strike on Earth's outer Meridian colony hub. Not a military target, a civilian installation. Roughly 800,000 residents, 3 major processing centers, a hospital complex. The logic, as best I could reconstruct it, was that if humanity bled at home, the fleet would have to split its attention, that human commanders would make emotional decisions, that the species that had been so quietly, patiently, methodically holding its position would fracture when the cost became personal. He did not understand us at all. The strike force that launched from Velshar Prime consisted of 44 warships, the fastest the king had. They were through the first jump point in under an hour. They came out of jump transit at the outer Meridian colony hub and found 380 human vessels already holding position in a complete encircling formation. 380. The strike force decelerated to a stop. On the open channel, Admiral Laurie's voice again, same unhurried calm. Welcome to Outer Meridian. This colony is under the protection of the reconstituted independent fleet. You are not going to do what you came here to do. Your options are to return to Velshar Prime under escort or to hold your current position indefinitely. We suggest option 1. The food situation for 44 crews in a standoff is going to become uncomfortable faster than you might think. The strike force held for 4 hours. Then they turned around. I found out later that the order came not from a command override but from the officers of the strike force themselves, collectively and quietly, after a discussion that I imagine was brief and pointed. They had been sent to threaten civilians. They had found a wall they could not go through, and somewhere in the space between those 2 facts, the decision had made itself. They went home. I was in the secondary secure room with Owen when we received the report. Colin Harper had indeed been maintaining excellent equipment in there for 18 years. The room had a direct relay to Admiral Laurie's command channel, secure and unmonitored. The King's next move will be flight, Laurie's voice said. Our pattern analysis shows he has a private transit shuttle registered to a personal account. He will use it. We have 2 options. We stop him or we follow him. Stopping him risks a confrontation that escalates, Owen said. Correct. Following him risks him finding a safe haven and prolonging this by years. Owen looked at me. I thought about Mara Voss and what she had told me about the difference between ending something and resolving it. One ship, I said. No weapons lock, just follow, make it personal and make it boring. Laurie was quiet for a moment, then say more. He is a king, I said. He has never been alone in his life. Send one pilot, just one, keep a distance. Make it clear that wherever he goes, we'll be there, not as a threat, as a reminder that there is no version of this where he simply disappears and the problem disappears with him. I paused. Make it tedious. Kings are not good with tedious. Another silence. I have a pilot who is very good at tedious, Laurie said. Then use her, I said. Owen signed the authorization. The King's private shuttle left the Spire's private base 6 hours later. It made it 42 kilometers before a single human light runner, 1/4 its size, settled into a trailing position that was close enough to be obvious and far enough to be completely unthreatening. The light runner's pilot, whose name I learned later was Carol Briggs, and who had apparently spent 12 years flying courier routes in the outer systems, and was constitutionally incapable of being rattled by anything, opened a channel to the shuttle. Good evening, Your Majesty. I'll be keeping you company tonight. No rush. I've got plenty of fuel and good music. The King's shuttle adjusted course twice, testing. Carol Briggs matched both adjustments without comment. Then she started playing something slow and instrumental through the open channel. She kept the channel open for the entire duration. The King turned his shuttle around after 3 hours. I heard about this in real time through the relay, and I sat in the secondary secure room, and I felt something loosen in my chest that I had not realized was clenched. Mara would have loved that, I said. Owen, beside me, made a sound that was almost a laugh. She would have sent flowers afterward, he said, the expensive kind. He was right. She absolutely would have. The interspecies tribunal session was held on neutral ground, at a station called Selvari, which orbited a dim star in a system that nobody claimed and everybody used for exactly this kind of purpose. It was 6 weeks after the execution at the Throne Spire. 6 weeks of blockade, of evidence review, of species councils meeting behind closed doors and emerging with revised positions, of a galaxy very carefully deciding what it thought about what had happened. I attended as an official documentation witness, not a prosecutor, not an advocate. Mara had always been clear about the danger of humans becoming too central to the mechanisms that were supposed to be neutral. We are a party to this, she had told me once. We are not the arbiters. Those are different things and they must stay different. The tribunal panel was 7 species. Pelari, Arveshi, 2 non-Dominion outer system species I had met only briefly, a Velshar jurist who had publicly opposed the king for decades, a Kelthran legal scholar who was, I learned, one of Admiral Veln's former instructors, and a human-allied Gavosi elder who had somehow retained complete impartiality despite knowing Mara personally. She was 300 years old and made every decision with the specific gravity of someone who intended to still be around for the consequences. The case was not complicated. The evidence was clear. The convoy rerouting records, the Pelari session documentation, the freight manifests, Veln's internal fleet communications, the Kelthran Shipping Authority's own logs, which 3 junior officials had quietly certified and submitted to the tribunal portal after the King's shuttle turned around, and the political landscape shifted enough to make honesty less dangerous than silence. Fabricated charges, public execution of an innocent person, abuse of the treaty's judicial provisions, attempted strike on a civilian colony installation. King Aldrich spoke in his own defense for 4 hours. He was very good at speaking. He had been speaking from a position of absolute authority for 40 years, and he had the kind of voice and manner that fills rooms with the impression of inevitability. It was interesting to watch that voice meet a panel of 7 who were not his subjects and were not impressed by inevitability. The Gavosi elder watched him for 4 hours, with the expression of someone waiting for a river to stop. When he finished, she said very quietly, "The record speaks. The verdict took 2 days. Exile, not execution, not imprisonment, permanent removal from governance, permanent restriction from Dominion-affiliated systems, and a formal record of findings that would accompany his name in every historical archive that the tribunal had jurisdiction over, which was most of them. Aldrich had expected execution. I could see it in the way he held himself through the reading of the verdict, braced for something final. When exile was announced instead, he looked, briefly, confused, then contemptuous, then something more complicated and harder to name. I think he had believed, somewhere under everything, that humanity wanted what he would have wanted in the same position: dominance, the complete elimination of a threat. He had spent so long in the architecture of absolute power that he could not fully read an opponent who did not want to replace him. He could not imagine that anyone could stand in a position of total advantage and then choose restraint. It was not a failure of intelligence. He was not a stupid man. It was a failure of imagination specific to people who have never genuinely lost anything. The human delegation sat in their observer seats throughout the reading. No celebration, no visible reaction, just attention, complete and quiet. Afterward, the Kelthran legal scholar approached the head of the human delegation, a woman named Nora Gale, who had been a treaty lawyer for 20 years, and who wore the same expression of polite patience in every situation I had ever seen her in. "I want to understand something," the scholar said. "You have a fleet that the Dominion cannot match. You have demonstrated that capacity clearly. You have evidence of a profound wrong done to your people. You have complete economic leverage over 2 of the most resource-significant systems in the Dominion, and you are asking for an exile and a tribunal." "Yes," Nora said. "Why not more?" Nora was quiet for a moment, looking at the scholar with genuine consideration, the kind that takes the question seriously rather than batting it away. "Because we've been where you are," she said. 2,000 years ago, we were the ones who lost a war we didn't entirely understand and had to live inside a treaty that was written by people who were more interested in containment than fairness. We know what that does to a species over time. It builds pressure. It teaches a people to be small. And the pressure doesn't disappear, it accumulates, and eventually something breaks." She paused. "We're not interested in creating the next version of that problem. We're not interested in a galaxy that behaves well because it's afraid of us. That's just the same architecture with a different king." The scholar was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want?" he said. "Something that works," she said. "Something with teeth that are actually pointed at the behavior, not the species. A tribunal that can hear cases before they become executions. A structure where what happened to Mara Voss is not possible because the system itself prevents it, not because one species has enough ships to respond after the fact." She looked at him steadily. "We want the after the fact to stop being necessary." He looked at her for a very long time. Then he said, "The Kelthran bloc had 3 similar cases in the past 40 years. Cases where our people were charged under Dominion law, found against, and had no external appeal." "I know," she said. "I've read them." "You read them?" "We've been paying attention for 2,000 years, she said. "We just couldn't do anything about it until now." He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "I would like to be involved in the drafting process for the new accord." "I hoped you would," Nora said. "I have a list of 23 other delegates who said the same thing this morning." That was how the Selvari Accord began, not with a ceremony, not with speeches, with a treaty lawyer and a legal scholar standing in a corridor after a verdict making a list. I was not in that corridor. I heard about it from Petra Wills, who had overheard it while delivering a documentation package, and who told me with the expression of someone who has just watched something important happen and is still processing the size of it. "She had a list already," Petra said. "Nora Gale, she had a list of 23 names ready." "Of course she did," I said. "Mara trained her." Petra smiled. It was the first real smile I had seen on her face since the throne spire. Mara's state funeral was held on Earth, 17 days after the tribunal verdict, in a coastal city on the eastern shore with a harbor that turned gold in the late afternoon light. I flew back for it. Most of the diplomatic corps did. Admiral Veln attended in full uniform as the official Kelthran representative. 3 other Dominion-affiliated species sent delegations. The Gavosi elder attended personally, which was, I was told, the first time in 60 years she had traveled to any human world. The ceremony was long, because there was a great deal to say, and also because a lot of people needed to be in the same place at the same time processing the same loss, and ceremony exists to give structure to things that would otherwise be unbearable. Mara's daughter was there, 14 years old now, dark-haired like her mother, standing very straight in the way of children who have decided that the way to get through something is to hold themselves together from the outside. I did not speak to her during the ceremony. Afterward, when people were gathered in smaller groups on the harbor steps with the gold water behind them, she found me. "You were her aide," she said. "Yes, for 6 years. She looked at me with very direct eyes. "She talked about you," she said. "She said you were good at remembering things." "She was generous," I said. "She said the important things are the ones that are easy to forget," the girl said. "The small things, what people actually did, not what they said they did." I thought about Gavrin and his perfect records. I thought about Colin Harper and his cable conduit. I thought about Carol Briggs and her slow music on an open channel in the dark. "She was right about that," I said. The girl nodded. She looked at the harbor. "She left me a letter," she said, "to be opened if she didn't come back from Velshar." She paused. "She said the treaty was more fragile than she'd wanted it to be. She said she hoped she was wrong." Another pause. "She said if she wasn't, she wanted me to know that what came after would be worth it, that things being worth it doesn't always mean they don't hurt." I could not say anything for a moment. "She was right about that too," I said when I could. The girl nodded again, with the gravity of someone deciding to believe something. Then she went back to her grandparents, and I stood on the harbor steps until the light changed. I went back to Selvari Station 2 weeks later for the start of the Accord drafting sessions. Owen was there. Nora Gale was there. Veln was there as a formal Kelthran representative. The Gavosi elder was there. 26 other delegations were there. My office was a small room with a window that looked out over the station's central atrium, which was a wide space full of people from 17 species moving through it in all directions, talking, negotiating, arguing, eating things I could not identify and probably should not try. It was loud and complicated and occasionally chaotic, and it smelled like several different kinds of food simultaneously, which after 6 weeks of crisis was actually a very welcome thing. On my first morning, I stood at that window for a while, watching it. Petra Wills appeared beside me with 2 cups of coffee, the good kind, and handed me one without comment. "Big day," she said. "Biggest," I said. She looked out at the atrium. "Do you think it'll hold?" she said. "The new Accord, do you think it actually works this time?" I thought about it honestly. "It has better architecture," I said. "Real enforcement, proportional representation, appeal mechanisms. It was designed by people who have experienced what happens when a treaty only protects the strong." I paused. "Whether it holds depends on whether people keep paying attention, keep doing the work, keep sending the reports and attending the sessions and remembering the small things." "That sounds like a lot of work," she said. "It is," I said. "Mara said peace wasn't a destination, it was a practice." Petra sipped her coffee. She looked out at the atrium, at 17 species moving through the same space in the same morning. "I used to think that was something people said," she said, "to sound wise." "So did I said. Below us, someone had started an argument about table arrangement, which had drawn in 4 additional delegations and was rapidly becoming animated. A Pelari diplomat was gesturing broadly. An Arveshi representative was producing documentation from somewhere inside his formal robes. Two humans I did not recognize were looking at a floor plan and pointing at different corners simultaneously. A Kelthran junior aide caught my eye from across the atrium, raised her hands in a gesture of universal exasperation, and then grinned. I grinned back. There was an alert on my earpiece. A new border dispute, 3 systems away, early stage, 2 species and a misread trade clause and nobody throwing anything yet. Early stage was good. Early stage meant there was still room to fix it before it became something that needed a word whispered into a wrist and a 2,000-ship fleet materializing in an outer system. Early stage meant there was still room to do the work. I finished my coffee, handed the empty cup to Petra, and went to my desk. The window was still there behind me, and below it the atrium full of sound and motion and difficult, necessary, ongoing effort. It was not a triumphant moment. It was better than that. It was the beginning of the job.